Back of my head.
Yeah, record the back of my head, yeah. There it is, nice and shot. Right, okay, so I'll do a little demo and then, so last week, last week I did a watercolour demonstration, didn't I? Yeah, so that was the one I was working on last week. So it started as a line drawing the week before and then gradually added some more detail to the flowers. I think it might even been that way up. Difficult to tell. Yeah, that way up. So that's that one. This week I wanted to carry on with this one, which I sketched out the week before. So the acrylics demonstration, more of a kind of spring scene rather than a flower portrait. So I thought I'd do a little bit of that. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about painting on boards and preparing boards, which a couple of the students in the morning group were interested in. I just thought that might be quite useful for everybody. So I'll do a little bit of this to start with. So using acrylics.
Are you not filming today?
I think I am. Yep.
Is it there?
Yeah, hopefully it's working.
Is it working? Yeah, I think that's working.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, should be working.
Right, so started this morning, and basically it's a sort of background to foreground approach. And really, I'm not looking to get tons of detail in at this stage. So basically, sort of working it in two passes. So I've got a kind of greeny grey for this area here. Started to work the tree trunk in here and a little shelter. And then I think I actually need some darker tones here and some sort of one. Got a couple of figures, a couple there, and the other one is here. So I might, yeah, I think probably the figures will be the next stage, and then work forward from that. There's a little bit of shadow along here to go in, which I haven't put in yet. I think I'll wait for a minute for that. So quite a lot of the faces and the backs of the heads are all in shadow, so I can't really see features as such. So I'll just mix a darkish tone, perhaps some brown and orange and a little bit of red, just to get something that looks a bit like a fresh tone. A bit more brown. That wants to be quite dark in shadow. That can be placed. The lad is about here. And his arm is here. And the other one, it's not quite the same colour, but I'll just make that a bit greyer. The back of his head. And then we can just change brushes and get some of their t-shirts in. So they're a bluey grey. I've got a bit of pale blue mixed already from last week. I'm just going to use that. So it doesn't need tons of detail at this stage. It's just really just establishing where they're going to be. That's the shadow side. There's a little bit of light catching that side. And here, but really I can come back and pop that in later. A bit of light in there. And then the other figure, slightly darker blue with his shirt. In there. And a little bit of highlight on the back of his head. Just use some white for that. Just a bit there for something. So I think I need these shrubs on this level now. I'll use the same brush. And work forward. So mixing a green, some raw sienna, which is a nice earthy yellow. You don't want a very bright green, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. Very quickly just block that in there. Yeah. And then a little bit more. Yeah. Basically, I'll just carry that along a little bit. And then the tops of the shrubs are a bit brighter, so I'll add some yellow to that, just lighten that up a little bit. Livelier yellow in there. But again, it doesn't matter too much because I'm probably going to go back in some of these areas anyway and rework them a little bit. The bottoms of these are a bit darker, make that a bit darker with some brown and blue and black. And then I think I'll start cutting some of the flower colours and then cutting the greens around there. So, at this stage I'll just make one pink out, magenta, crimson. And what I find is some of the flowers kind of run into each other, and then you get the odd one or two that just stand out on their own. So some of those in there. And then, while it's still wet, I could just make some of that pink a little bit lighter. Vary it a little bit. So I'm not really painting individual flowers, but the dots and dashes hopefully give the impression of daffodils, not daffodils, tulips. You see if this is working. So yeah, basically I just keep that going right the way along, then come back and give another second pass, get some of these textures in here, some of the lights and shadows. So this one I'll keep going, perhaps come back to that next week with some of the details. Onto the boards. So a lot of you use the sort of commercially available boards, and I sell, I've got a few that up there, which one two people have bought from me. These are sort of fairly sort of inexpensive boards. They're really a piece of cloth stretched over a bit of cardboard and then primed up. So that's the basic sort of boards. These can be quite nice, but sometimes I notice one or two of you found the texture a little bit intrusive. So the cheaper ones tend to have a more intrusive texture. This one is a bit more expensive.
How much is that one, that first one?
These ones,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. The ones I've got there, I can't remember how much they are either. I have to have a look. They're a little bit smaller than that, but Robert's bought some from me. Do you remember? Are they about 80p, the ones like that?
That was a pound, I think.
Perhaps about £1 or something like that. Something like this I get from Jackson's Art, and these are a few pounds, but these are on MDF board, so it's a stronger board. It's also like a finer cotton texture, so it's a bit easier, particularly on a small scale, to have something a little bit smoother. So they're the ready-made ones.
So are these for watercolour or for acrylic?
These are more acrylics and oils. Yeah, so these are good for acrylics and oils. And then watercolour, you're probably better off with the watercolour paper for watercolours. I like this board is I make myself, and it's really it just starts off something like this, MDF board. This one's 4mm thick, and I just buy a big sheet from the wood yard. And I get them to cut that up a little bit for me, and then I'll take it home and I'll cut it into smaller pieces like this. You might find a wood yard that will cut, if you're interested in getting some, that will cut them up smaller. B&Q sell boards about this wide by about 4 foot, and sometimes they'll cut them up. I don't know quite how how good they
Depends
are.
what mood the chap is in.
Well, this is it. Whether he's there, whether they come.
Sometimes he's miserable and he don't want to talk to you.
Yeah, so it's a bit hit and miss from being curious. I tend to go to a woodyard on Sutton Road, South End Timber, and I get a big sheet, so it's 8 foot by 4 foot. And I get them to cut it into 3 for me, and then I'll then chop them up smaller. But they may well cut them up smaller if you wanted to. The other thing you can do is get a woodyard to cut it into strips, and then you can get a Stanley knife and a steel ruler and just score them. And then if you score them on both sides, you can usually snap them into a side. So a little bit of a rough edge. You can always sand them off afterwards. I usually sand these edges because they can be a little bit rough.
How thick are they?
You can get different thicknesses. This is 4 millimeters thick. Other alternatives are, these are other things that I've put on. Things like hardboard, that's sort of very pretty inexpensive. I prefer the MDF because you've got a smooth surface both sides. But that's absolutely fine.
It's not the one with the iron in it, is it?
Sorry?
It's the MDF got the iron in it.
Got any?
Oil.
I don't know, not sure.
And you have to go over and make sure you gesso it after.
Yeah, you need to put gesso on it. Yeah. So I might buy this gesso, which is really an acrylic primer, and give it a couple of coats of that. This is another one I've got. So you can I use my board to come out this sort of colour. So I either mix a bit of acrylic paint in with the last coat. So I do 2 coats or 3 coats. Last coat I put a bit of acrylic paint in with the primer. Or lately I've been buying this one, which comes ready. It's a grey primer, so that's quite handy. So I'll either use it the colour it comes out, or just mix it with the white primer to get a paler grey. So that's what I use. That is actually, other surfaces you could use are things like just old bits of cardboard. So that's an old palette thing, just prime that up. That's the back of a sketchbook, so that works nicely, just cardboard. You can get, this is just a bit of mount board. So quite often, sometimes you find in picture frame shops, they cut mounts and they have the middles, and they sell the middles off quite inexpensively. So that's a cheap way of getting it board. This is sort of fairly alright. It does warp a little bit, and it's a little bit vulnerable to getting the corners, damaged really. But it's still fine to paint on. I've also sometimes I'll keep reusing the bits of board I've got. If I'm doing these sort of demos and I don't turn it into a painting, I just paint over it. So I just use a bit of emulsion. So emulsion paint is fine for just getting things primed up if you want to. If you've got basically whatever's lying around at home. So sometimes I've had bits of emulsion paint lying around and bits of board. So I've used that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it really on board. But I do find that I do a lot of paintings, do a lot of these quick demos, so I get through lots of boards. So for me, this is a lot more cost efficient really way of working. Plus, I quite like working on a fairly smooth surface, particularly with a smaller board. I like to work on a smoother surface.
So you don't use linen if you've done it. Linen.
Linen, you could use linen. This one is actually a board that I've put a texture on it by sticking a piece of muslin on it.
Oh, right.
So that gives it a little bit of texture. That's an old linen shirt. I might cut that up and stick that onto the board. That'll give me a nice texture. I have done that in the past, and linen's got quite a distinctive texture.
Recycle, yes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, if you went and bought a bit of linen canvas, you'd be probably looking at 20-30 quid for a metre or something. So any bits of linen, any old tea towels or shirts or things that come your way can be incorporated into a bit of artwork. Linen itself, linen canvases, if you bought, just even buying it not stretched up, is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
I've only used it once. Canvas is fine. For bigger paintings, I use canvas. I'll make a stretch or stretch around a bit forward. But for the smaller paintings, I prefer a slightly smoother texture anyway. So anyway, yeah, I thought that might be of use, hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah.